and we have that right now. But the challenge is to make sure those dollars, don't get siphoned off for waste, fraud, and abuse. They go into the ground. And I'm a little worried about some of the definitions that are coming out, whether it's the infrastructure funds or the ARPA funds. We have so much of these broadband dollars that are out there. And for instance, Treasury just put out some rules that worries me a little bit in terms of potentially leading to overbuilding in areas that already have, 99 over 19 or something like that, rather than the communities that are out there that still have 0 over 0. So I think first and foremost, we have to absolutely prioritize those with no internet service today, because trust me, there is plenty of communities that have no internet service today that we need to bring up to speed before we go into places that may need a second or a third provider. So I think the most important thing is going to be to prioritize the unserved, to keep an eye out for waste, fraud, and abuse. But to your point, we are all working at the middle right now. We've got, I think, it's been a long time since we've seen this much bipartisan consensus when it comes to telecom. And frankly, it's been a busy year at the FCC. We've been 2-2, but we've got an awful lot done. I think it started right at the beginning. Chairwoman Rosenworcel reached out, said, hey, where can we work together? And it flowed from there. And, we've gotten almost $24 billion voted across the finish line on low-income programs in the last year. I think that's an unprecedented sum. The chair and I did a trip together to look at some of the aftermath of one of the hurricanes, and I think there could be some consensus on network resiliency that we're going to work on. So we've gotten a lot of really good programs done. And to your point, we just got to keep some common sense guardrails as this big amount of money works its way through the system, and the maps are going to be key. I mean, I had called for the maps to get done last fall. It hasn't happened. The senator said this summer. I thought I heard Raimondo say this summer as well. I haven't heard a number inside the FCC, but I do think we got to get those maps done, because if the funds start going out not through the map, the risk of overbuilding is high. The risk of missing those communities that have 0 megabits is high, and so we have to do everything we can to accelerate the completion of those maps.
You've been a leader on the deployment agenda. So, one touch, make ready, dig once, streamlining, the small cell order, all of those things that help all of our companies who are trying to deploy not only fast networks, but to deploy them quickly and to not have the delays that increase cost, which then keep a lot of communities from getting what they need on internet and broadband service. Is there any way that the broadband funding, or do you have any thoughts or recommendations? How do we help the states who are planning the broadband investments to also adopt best practices on streamlining and deployment? And is that an opportunity as we execute the funding?
It's a great point. I mean, because if you look back the last 3 or 4 years, we engaged obviously in a lot of infrastructure reforms at the FCC. Then Chairman Pai tapped me to lead those efforts. And I thought we got, not to pat myself on the back too much, I thought we got a lot done. And it really spiked a lot of infrastructure builds in this country. You noted on the small cell side, we had something like 708 new cell sites go up in 2016. And that number ballooned by some estimates over 46,000 in 2019 after a lot of the reforms that we did. So that made a big difference, but we're not, raising the mission accomplished flag just yet. When you look at all these dollars, if we just spend all this money and we don't do it pursuant to streamlined infrastructure, we're largely jumping on the gas and the brakes at the same time. So I do think as the states look to channel this funding, there should be a series of best practices that they put in place. And the extent that we can make sure that money isn't siphoned to needless delays or excessive red tape, I think that's important. And so I think one thing that potentially is missing from that infrastructure plan is how do we get these dollars into the ground in a streamlined way? And so I would hope that states take some advantage of that to make sure that they do that.
And you had mentioned, all the different areas of work that the commission is doing now, and with Chairman Rosenworcel, who'll be addressing us later today. Any areas that you can see where there is bipartisan consensus, E-rate, other programs that, as we come out of the pandemic, the FCC did a tremendous job, I think, on making the E-rate program more flexible. The telehealth and telemedicine funding and programs much more relevant, and a number of policies made: telemedicine, telehealth, education, remote learning, remote work. I just want to stop and thank the commission. I think that the job that the commission did during COVID is really a tremendous example of a government agency rising to the occasion and meeting the challenge.
Yeah.
And so,
look, you're right. I think there's a lot of good work that's going on. I think there's a tremendous opportunity right now for bipartisan consensus. Part of that is driven by the 2-2 nature. But look, there's a lot of different ways to run a 2-2 agency. I mean, we all could have gone to our corners and not compromised. That's not what has taken place over the last year. We've all worked to the middle and gotten a tremendous amount of smart, common sense things done. There's a handful of people that say, well, I'm not getting my way on this one issue over here, and therefore the entire agency, in my view, has been deadlocked for a year, but it couldn't be further from the truth. If you look at the work we've done together on telehealth, which has been very, very beneficial, and the mustard seed idea for that came from Ruleville, Mississippi. We were able to, take nationwide a smart telehealth program that was put up there in the Mississippi Delta. We've got a lot of progress on that done this last year. Commissioner Starks and I worked together to make sure we could get an EEO item out the door that was important to him. Again, I think network resiliency is someplace we can come together. USF, I put some ideas out there on how we can further stabilize that fund. I hope that gets some bipartisan support. And then right now we're working hard on this MDU MTE item that the chairwoman has talked about. I think this is an important one. I like competition. I like choice. And as I've said, I don't see any significant hurdle to getting that done on a bipartisan basis. We've done broadband labels together, which was something I think in the Biden competition executive order. So there's a tremendous amount that we're doing, that we're driving to the middle on. You mentioned E-rate. We had that $7 billion ECF program, which is essentially a version of E-rate that we worked together on and got that done. So I think we're working really, really well, doing an awful lot. Are we doing sort of an extreme version of Title II style net neutrality? No, that's one thing we're not doing at the moment, but we're doing so many other things. And when it comes to sort of that version of net neutrality, this Title II style, from my perspective, there's really only two constituents left for that type of an approach, which is those that want rate regulation and those that want to fundraise. But if you look at everything else that we're doing, we're making good progress. And I think there can be a pretty easy path forward on net neutrality at the end of the day. If we put rate regulation to the side, there's not that much debate left about some basic common sense rules of the road. So if people want to put an idea on the table that takes rate regulation off the table, and then from my perspective, if we're going to go down this path of looking at neutrality, then we need to look up and down the stack. Because if you're a megabit of data and you look at where potential problems are in terms of the entire internet ecosystem, in terms of neutrality, it doesn't necessarily take you exclusively to the ISP level. So from my perspective, I think if we're going to go back down this path, we need to do it in a way that really looks at the internet ecosystem as it exists today.
I want to follow up on one of your items that you mentioned, MTE, or for short, condo competition, apartment competition, multi-tenant.
So many different names over the years. Sometimes it's MDU, sometimes it's MTE. So I try to catch up with the latest lingo, but I'll go with whatever you say here.
And so I think the alliteration of condo competition. But
I like a good branding, so we'll go with that.
Talk a little bit, that started under Chairman Pai. President Biden has included it as one of his competition reforms that he wants to emphasize. Over a third of Americans live in what is considered a MTE. Yep. How do you see that process going forward, and anything that our members can do to help encourage that?
Well, it's funny, when the Chairwoman Rosenworcel first announced that she was circulating a condo competition item, there was some pushback that I heard. There was some, cable interest that thought it wasn't necessary and could do more harm than good. There were some people that said, well, this is in Biden's executive order. How can you support something that was in the Biden competition EO? And again, my starting point here was, I like choice, I like competition. As you pointed out, this was something that, was started under Pai. And so I've never approached that proceeding thinking that there's going to be too many significant hurdles to getting a bipartisan vote. And we've engaged on the item, and I'm, very confident that we're going to get a product here that's going to be good for choice, good for competition, be bipartisan. And it just seems to me that it makes a lot of sense.
Well, that's good news. And another area of bipartisanship has been around 5G strategies and spectrum policy. INCOMPAS has been very much involved in something called the the 12 gigahertz, the 5G for 12 gigahertz
What about this?
coalition. And it was a bipartisan unanimous vote started by Chairman Pai in the proceeding. It's 500 megahertz. That is, and this is very, very important, unencumbered.
Is FAA in there anywhere?
FAA is not there. DOT is
Right.
not there.
Starting to get me closer to it
there.
now. Okay.
NASA is not there. So there are no, issues of encumbrance. And as we have just recently witnessed, the difficulty with the C-band and where there are encumbrances.
Right.
And as we look to competition with China and the race to 5G, does 12 gigahertz possibly represent not only a huge band of unencumbered for both 5G, but opportunistic use, Wi-Fi and unlicensed and all those types of things? But does it also give us like a insurance policy that if other things get encumbered, that if it shows that there's not harmful interference, if the engineering, is it both a win-win and a insurance policy for what we're trying to achieve on a bipartisan basis in spectrum and 5G?
Look, we certainly need more spectrum. We need it, across all the spectrum bands, low, mid, high. With 12, I'm very, very open-minded on this. At the end of the day, my guiding principle on 12 has always been, let's see where the FCC engineers come out. And I want a win-win. If we can do terrestrial 5G in 12 and not, cause harmful interference to existing incumbent operations there, then I'm a yes. And so for me, it's just taking a look at where the engineering comes down. If we can do both there, I'm all for it. And I've yet to sort of, get a final cut or briefing from the Bureau on that. I don't know the timing on all that, but if we can get there, then I'm happy to do it.
The recent court decision on 6 gigahertz is a great example that, one, the FCC is the expert agency. Two, the engineering studies and expertise that will show whether there's a harmful interference in that standard. All that was reaffirmed. And the same engineers who did the 6 gigahertz study also did our 12 gigahertz. And so,
Right.
So we look forward to working with you because
Right.
we do want it to be a win-win. We want it to enhance competition in the wireless market. We want to beat China in 5G and
Right.
win that race. And we want as many redundant multiple options in our spectrum policy to give us that abundance of options.
Yeah. Well, we have some challenges on the spectrum front. I mean, you mentioned in there, I think, the C-band, and this was not one where, I've been a little bit reluctant to speak about the C-band. I say that with tongue in cheek since I've talked about it a lot, written letters on it. And I'm very concerned about it. I'm concerned about it for two reasons. One is, what does it mean for C-band deployment? Right now, we got, according to some estimates, 90% of the C-band that we were supposed to have. It's hard for me to tell. I have not been in the room where the White House, the administration, has been working to modify the framework that the expert agency, the FCC, put in place. I've seen some reports that say they've identified cell sites as far as 5 miles from airports that they want to shut down and have been shut down. So I don't think that's good when you look at it from the narrow perspective of C-band and the vital importance of it to 5G, that we're not getting the full build out of it. I think that's not a good thing. But I think the broader problem here is sort of what you were talking about, which is we've had a problem for quite a long time that has been emerging and growing, which is as spectrum has become more important, as connectivity has become more important, federal agencies that have that spectrum realize the value and importance of it. And I don't, begrudge them that they've got their missions and spectrum is vital to their missions, but Congress made a decision years ago. In fact, it goes back to the 1930s. It says we need one place, a centralized federal agency to coordinate spectrum usage and to make the final calls on what is in the public interest, and that's the FCC. What we've seen the last couple of years is agencies that are not happy with Congress's decision to house that final call in the FCC. We saw it in Legato with DOD. We saw it in 5.9 with DOT and the DSRC interests. We saw it in 24 gigahertz with NOAA weather radar. We saw it on more of a policy side on 2.5 with Department of Education. And we're certainly seeing it right now in the C-band with the FAA. And so I think it's incumbent that we continue to step up and say, Congress made this decision. It has served America very, very well. I mean, people like to nitpick around the edges, but I think at the end of the day, America's wireless internet system is the envy of the world because we funnel all the final calls into the FCC, that we look at all the stakeholders, FAA, DOT, NOAA. We feed all that information in. We have experts at the FCC who do this day in and day out. Safety of life, interference issues, they're the pros at. And on C-band, they made the final call. This was 2 years ago now. And then this process went, frankly, off the rails very late. And we obviously had the lower portion of the C-band go this time. We've got an upper portion of the C-band closer to radio altimeters that's set to go live, I think, in December of 23. And so I do think we can't just sit back and have our spectrum authority plutoed by other agencies that want to get involved here. And it sort of reminds me a little bit of the Lord of the Rings as one analogy, and sort of the FCC spectrum authority has become the ring that all these other agencies are trying to go after. And I think we have to make sure that we stand up for the FCC's role. I think there's some interest in Congress maybe in looking at legislating here to make sure our federal agencies, you go through NTIA interface with the FCC. But again, C-band was commercial on commercial spectrum. This wasn't even federal spectrum, but of course there were federal interests there when it came to FAA and the altimeter. So I think that was a bad sign, not just in and of itself for C-band, but it's a bad sign for all these other spectrum fights that I hope we have, whether it's lower 3 gigahertz, 12, everywhere else. We have to continue to show strength and leadership out of the FCC and defend the conclusions that our experts are making.
Well, as we go forward, we look forward to working with you on the deployment agenda.
On 12 gigahertz.
On 12 gigahertz.
Right. MDU. We got some alignment. This is good.
That's right. And open internet without rate regulation.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So we want to find a way to help the commission and Congress and the other agencies that are part of this critical time to achieve a new American commitment on connectivity for every American.
Absolutely.
And we think that this is an exciting time, a transformational time. And we're we're thankful for your leadership.
Thanks. Well, great to join you. Really appreciate it. Thanks.